Hello everyone. Welcome back to episode 5 of the Faceplant Chronicles. Today you and I are going to be taking a step back from all of the crazy processing of Faceplant that we normally do, and we're going to be looking at some very, more simple processing that will try to give us more mileage. So I've been listening to a lot of Noisia as of late, and this is not going to be me accomplishing how to make a Noisia bass, so keep your expectations healthy. However, through studying this stuff, there is things that we can learn to help, again, try to formulate our own basses, and I might be surprising you with some of the tools that we use today and what it can do for you. So we're going to be starting with a sine or a saw wave, and the first thing I'm going to do is put a limiter on this and turn the gain up, and then we're going to go ahead and hit this on the detuning here. So what I'm going to do though is normally I have this set to somewhere around here, but I'm going to crank this all the way up to almost an entire semitone apart, and that way it's just going to oscillate faster whenever we do pitch bending and stuff, which sounds pretty nice. So something to play with is using either the hard, the smooth, or the synthetic, or different stuff like this is actually great because it will give you just weird results. Okay, well, maybe not that one for this particular use case, but for now we're going to stick with smooth. Just know that utilizing this is going to give you different behaviors whenever you work with this. Cool, so let's go ahead and toss a notch in here now. And this is kind of nice to kind of throw stuff in here. You can also do some other things like the nonlinear filter, which is awesome. The only reason why I usually prefer to use the regular filter over the nonlinear is because this has more flexibility as far as being able to create gaps. So we can essentially almost clear this entire sound if we wanted to, which is really nice actually in some cases, because you can kind of separate this without having to move this at all to get pretty much a low and high pass. And then if we have just a little bit of motion with this, depending on where you utilize this, can be really useful for certain things, which I'll be showing you here in just a second. So for now we're going to leave this somewhere in the middle, in between, 200 and 1000 hertz. That's generally the mud range that you want to be mindful of. And let's go ahead and add some gentle distortion to this. So automatically what we've done is we've actually accentuated this pulsing sound. So now whenever we use this pitch wheel, dope. So let's go ahead and talk about the main components of what we're working with today. And of course, some of that is going to be filtering. If you all have watched my videos or you've watched my comprehensive guide to neuro-bass classes, which I have for the ARCANUM memberships, I've also got the first 3 seasons for free on my channel. You'll usually see me pull up some crazy filtering shape like this and start to like get to the cutting board and start doing crazy movement patterns and stuff. And this is great. And there's definitely use cases for this, but I think what I was trying to go for here was something a little bit different that was focused more on using just different stuff to get different timbres. And so what I'm going to be showing you today, for the most part, is not really going to be utilizing a lot of filtering, if at all, maybe a low pass filter. What we're going to be talking about are the 3 main stereo enhancers, I guess, or stereo shifters, which are the phaser, flanger, and the chorus. Because getting into a deep dive of these are going to actually surprisingly give you a lot more movement and a lot more stuff than you previously thought, I guess is the best way that I can say that as eloquently as possible. But the thing with this is that typically I think that we don't touch these things because, especially if you put it on your entire signal, what happens? Well, you lose your sub, right? Or you lose the low end, you lose the power of that, and then we get into frequency splitting, we get into all that stuff. But like, think about it back in the day. Like, I was listening to Exodus and Sunhammer from Noisia, and a lot of times when they're introducing these kinds of sounds that have the crazy morphing and all that, they're usually not keeping the sub within this. And if you can kind of like let go of that for a bit and not be so, low end minded, then sometimes you end up getting just some really cool sounds that can be as like a, an enhancer or as a layer to just a regular sub. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's just play around with this, and I'll show you what kind of sounds we can get from doing stuff like this. So check this out. So this might seem a little bit subtle, but what happens if we toss this into a distortion? Well, suddenly it starts to actually kind of have a little bit more of a character to it. Cool. So what happens if we start messing with the chorus? And I want to do this individually, so that way you're not stacking these, and that way you can actually get like an idea. And this is how I generally like to play with effects, and this is how I'd also recommend that you do stuff, because it will teach you about relationships with other sounds, even if you're just doing simple things. So with this, check this out. This is going to be a lot more dramatic, but we can actually create a flanger if we set the spread to 0, and then we mess with the delay and the depth and the rate. So check this out. Can you hear it? So what happens if we set the taps to 3, and then we just start kind of going a little bit crazy with this? That's pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, I guess by adjusting the mix and stuff, then maybe you can preserve the low end if that's really important to you. But the big one that we want to talk about here is the flanger. This is probably the most versatile, and this is probably why I've been looking to do the most or revisit the most, because this kind of gives a lot of indications on how to get some cool stuff. If you listen to Exodus and you listen to those other tunes, a lot of times they have this crazy like flanging sound that's on their top end, and it's super crispy, and I don't know exactly what they're doing. You know, there's a couple of different ways to create a flanger sound aside from using just a device. For one, you can detune two waveforms just very slightly that are in audio, and when you play them together, it'll actually create a tearing sound, and maybe they're distorting something like that. You can apply the flanger, you can apply the chorus, you can apply a really short delay, pit up against itself, and perhaps manipulate the time very slowly. And then also comb filters, because all of these three are some kind of cousin or sibling, rather, of a comb filter. And so having that understanding between this being like soft and this being a little bit more phasey and this being a little bit more harder and a comb filter, blah, blah, blah. And then if you look at every single kind of DSP stuff, forgive me, it's a delay. I should have said that at the beginning, but yeah, so they're all kind of related, but the way that you can manipulate stuff like this is where the interest comes in for me. So let's play with the flanger, and then you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. I'd also recommend either headphones or a good speaker. If you're listening to this on your phone, then you're not really going to hear the nuance of what phasing and what character building, I guess, we're doing to this sound. So yeah. pretty cool. Let's turn on the scroll. So what happens if we do a little bit more to this now? Like, let's toss in a table shaper or something. Oh my god. That's so cool. Yeah, that's sick. So we can introduce some spread again. We can pull back some of this if we want to try to preserve some of the low end. Although, just for timbre's sake, I really like when it does something like that. But yeah, we can adjust this here. What I like about the flanger in particular is that it tends to kind of like smear the crunchiness on the mid highs, but we still have the phasing and the pulsing. But as you can see, just by utilizing some very simple tools, we've been able to accomplish like a really crazy and heavy sound. So, you know, one question that you might be asking me is, how do we fix this in case if we've got, you know, crazy phasing on the low end and stuff? The first thing that I want to tell you is context, because even though I'm doing cool pitching and whatnot, you might want to be mindful about like just using this as an effect or using this as an intro to your track. You can layer this with a separate sub just by doing this. Maybe you want to do a low pass or something, and you can kind of just send this to lane 2, and then that way you've got a clean sub. You can remove the low end from this if you want to at the end of the chain, which is not always the best idea, but it does work. You'll probably get some pre-ringing if you do that, so maybe be a little bit more gentle. The other thing too is if you are using a wavetable and you have just your basic shapes, so let's say you're at 128, I believe is almost a perfect saw, and you go into your table editor, you can just take out the first harmonic at 128, kind of like so. Grab this guy, crap, cancel. Let's try that again. Undo. There we go. Yeah, so just grab this guy, take this one out, and then you'll have the same movement of the saw, but there's that. This sometimes is important to be mindful of depending on what you're going for, because it might change the timbre of your sound, but I wouldn't be so clinical with it, especially when you're in an explorative standpoint, because, you know, it's not like all this stuff is just hypothetical and theory crafting, right? So you don't really have to worry too much about, you know, does it sound correct? And that's what I want to try to get you away from. It's just going to change it, and we're being intentional about how to maybe make this a little bit more user friendly. So yeah, with that, I think that some of the cool things about this that we can do now is that anything that we add on top of this is going to kind of enhance this in a lot of ways. So if we kind of take a step back, like what happens if we add a fat trader to this, which is just another distortion unit? Yeah, let's just see what that sounds like. Well, now we've created like a much more crazy roar sound, and then once we have all that stuff, if we go into a matter of utilizing this, maybe something like the flip cue, where we start getting into all of the other crazy filtering things and whatnot. If you want filters like this, you can check out Alckemy.com or check out, again, the other stuff that I talk about. But long story short, to kind of drive a point home, we're going to use just like an LFO table and go boom, set that to here, here, 2, 3. We can go like this on the second one, yoink, go yoink. And then this is just, you know, as a means of like giving us a little bit of extra movement, but let's see what that does for us. Okay, that's kind of cool, but now we can get into something kind of like this as well. Maybe we can go here, Sorry, this is the part that I kind of just speed through because it's kind of inconsequential and just a matter of like, hey, let's get to some results. We could do that. We could do that. Let's set that to kind of smooth. And then now we can kind of utilize this to figure out where we want this to go. Let's see what happens if we put this up here. Kind of broken. That's okay. What happens if we put it here? Okay, so maybe we might want to find a balance between this stuff. Because it sounds cool, but... Now I wanted to make a point with this, because as cool as this is and whatnot, what happens if we just not do that and we just do this? And instead we try to find something here. I prefer to use the LFO tables a lot lately because that way they have consistent shapes even if you're morphing between them. These are also really nice morphing filter shapes rather. So yeah, what happens if we do something like this and then we randomize something like this and go like that and then turn the smooth on, set this to slow time, and then be like, alright, well, what does this sound like? Interesting. So as you can tell, this actually is not destroying and creating too many peaks that are feeding into the distortion, and I would actually argue this sounds better, even though it's more simple. Would I do this on every bass? Not necessarily, but look, we're only using 2 filters through this entire step. We're using a low pass and a notch. And I think that this is important to realize, because now if you start thinking about applying this to things like Vital and Serum, right, these are things that are all within those synthesizers. And so what happens now if we start, applying some of this other stuff into it, and we can kind of see what happens. And really the whole point of this video as well is that it's not just about what effects I'm using. It's about being mindful of how much of this, how much of that. If you put too much salt, on your burgers or whatever, I don't know, maybe you all do that? I don't know. I put onion and salt in my burgers. But yeah, if you salt your burger too much, then it tastes like shit. If you have a tendency to kind of give it just a little bit, and you feed into it to where you find just right, then you have a tendency to get this really nice combination that's quote unquote the perfect balance, if you will. So pretty cool. Maybe we want to apply the flanger on the back end of this, because I want this to constantly be trying to pull this. And something that I was doing to try to maybe see if I could get that was pulling out the resonance and just like distorting that to hell, but we tend to just get squelchiness. Which it does sound kind of cool, but I don't know, I haven't cracked this code yet, but I still feel like there's some kind of relationship behind having a really high, or maybe even this, of a really high resonant filter that's being sent through a bunch of processing or something that is starting to break the resonance points apart. And that way it gets out of this, like, it transforms it from this squelchiness thing to this tearing sound that you have. And again, it's just the place that I'm exploring, and I'm not going to obsess over it, but that's kind of my theory. Oh shit, sorry. But basically, I want this to be like really tearing through. But but in a way that's not like, you know, really irritating, in a way that's like, oh, this actually sounds like it's a very prominent flanger sound. But I mean, like I said, you know, take a listen to this. Like, we're not really doing a whole lot to it, and we're getting a very complex sound just from having excuse me, one piece of motion. And so I think that these kinds of things are important to discuss, because, you know, if you've watched my channel anyways, like, I'm like processing. Do it to heck. Destroy everything. Yeah. And there is a time and a place for that, you know. At the same time, if you can kind of back away and really try to get the most out of using simple effects, you know, then it really changes your perspective sometimes on, hey, what happens if, you know, I only have a single chain of effects and I can't do super crazy frequency splitting. I can't do super insane, you know, distribution of effects across multiple lanes or something of the sort. Because once you understand this, then when you scale it and you start getting into crazy stuff, kind of like this, or, you know, say any of these filters, do I have anything recent? Yeah, something like this, and we can just go into something that's a little bit more complicated, kind of like so. Then suddenly you're like, one, do I need all that? Two, how can I utilize the understanding of this stuff to start to fine tune whatever we have going on here? And just for fun, let's go ahead and turn that on and see what this sounds like. Sounds pretty cool. What happens if we throw on a fuse compressor and OTT the shit out of it? And with that, I will conclude this video and say happy producing. Again, if you all want to check this stuff out, you can get a lot of these filters and sounds and stuff at alchemy.com. Requiem 2 is the latest and greatest pack that I have. I think that that's what this is included in with that. Yeah, Requiem 2. But other than that, if you're out to build your own stuff, I mean, take what I've just given you and make your own cool stuff, because even just the simple things that we did before these crazy racks sound really cool. That's all for me. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Would love it if you like and subscribe to the video. Hit me up for lessons if you're interested, and I will see you in the next one.